We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
So since 2014, the United States has been dealing with a killer that's only gotten worse. In 2021, killing 70,000 Americans. It's the leading cause of death for Americans 18 to 45 years old. It's deadly. We can't stop it, and we're not stopping it. We know who makes it. We know where it comes from. We know how it gets here. But still, it continues to poison Americans every single day. And it's not suicide. It's not guns. It's not vehicle accidents. It's fentanyl. And today we're very lucky to have my friend John Walters here joining us, former drug czar under President W. Bush from 2001 to 2009. And during that time, he was able to decrease teen drug use by 25%. He's worked in the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, and he's currently the president and CEO of the Hudson Institute and director of Hudson's Center for Substance Abuse Policy Research. So, John, thanks for being on.
Good to be with you.
And last time I saw you, I guess was a hearing on this issue as well.
Yes, it was.
So, it occurs to me, and I was just saying this before we started recording, I don't think I've actually done a comprehensive fentanyl, the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of fentanyl, which is weird because I'm always posting about it and doing videos, and I'm trying to go to war with the drug cartels. I'm doing it all, but I don't think I've actually had an expert like you on it to really talk about the drug itself and the policies and our history of the drug war. I think this will be super interesting. Easy for me to talk to, thank God, because I'm exhausted today. So luckily this is an easy subject. So hey, thanks for being on. Where do we begin? Maybe let's begin with what is fentanyl? And then go from there.
Yeah. Fentanyl's a synthetic opioid, which means it's in the family of heroin, morphine, but it's man-made. It's a medication that is used, it's a quick-acting medication. It's used sometimes in heart surgery because it suppresses respiratory and cardiac function, but so you want to use it, but you don't want it to last long when you're trying to bring people back. It's also used in a end-of-life high pain situation. There used to be fentanyl diverted from what are called transdermal patches, which are kind of Band-Aids stuck on the outside of the skin it slowly moves through the skin and can be used over time. Fentanyl became a kind of nightmare of illegal drugs because it is very cheap to make, and it is therefore, and it's so concentrated, which is why you have the overdose deaths. A few grains of salt in similar quantity can be enough to kill you. So it's very difficult to dilute to a proper dosage. But when you do it, these come in kilos, 2.2 pounds. A kilo of fentanyl, pure fentanyl, when diluted, is 10 million doses, which even in the amazing markup of the drug business is astounding. It's the same kilo as 500,000 lethal doses. Yeah. So this is a kind of chemical revolution. It can be made in in an industrial park, not in you don't need fields of poppy or in the case of cocaine, fields of coca. Mm-hmm. The markup is astounding, and it's now being not only marketed itself, but it's being marketed and mixed with other drugs.
You must know your stuff because it's hard to keep speaking through the annoying buzzers that just randomly go off in Congress. I tell our audience all the time, you're in the thick of it here. You're getting an authentic congressional podcast because these stupid buzzers are constantly going off and no one knows what they mean. Still don't. So there's obviously valid uses for it. I remember we carried it on deployment. Our medics carry it, in the form of a lollipop. So it's a very intense, for very acute pain. It's for when you get your legs blown off. I mean, it's a really serious drug for use in an operating room or by medical professionals. But it turns out it's just so easy to make. And why did it start getting popular in the illicit drug world in 2014? I don't have a good answer for why that is.
There was some diversion criminally before. When I was in the drug policy office with President Bush, George W. Bush, I served even his father's administration. There was a individual who made some in Mexico in about 2006, 2007. It came back up through. We started seeing people dying. They couldn't cut it properly. And ultimately, they found that it was a single chemist. The Mexicans allegedly arrested him, but they would not allow us to question them. So I don't know what happened to that individual. But all in all, we saw deaths starting moving as it was being distributed, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. And I could not get the Centers for Disease Control to begin to track this as a poisoning issue. So I did what you're not supposed to do, which I started having people on a conference call in the White House in my office of coroners, police officials, and others to try to warn people of the danger of this on the street. Ultimately, 700 people died, but there wasn't a repeat of that. But then I believe it's now clear with the help of the Chinese Communist government's failure to enforce rules, the precursors, first finished fentanyl, then precursors, that the ingredients to make fentanyl were shipped to Mexico, and it was made.
So you need a true chemical lab to create these precursors. Now, do these precursors have other, like, are they like dual use, or are they only for fentanyl?
Some of them do. There are also, to make it more complicated, there are what are called analogs. So there's variants of the molecules in fentanyl that can be used to cause it to become both stronger and different. So there have been some efforts to do that. But yes, you have to get pharmaceutical products in order to make this. And the Chinese Communist government has been known to be the source for a long time. Right. They have refused to crack down. This is the government, as we talked about in our hearing, that can find people who text about democracy anywhere in the country and punish them, but they claim they can't find the people who are shipping this.
They know exactly who they are. We'll get into that in a little bit. So it's Heisenberg from Breaking Bad couldn't necessarily make this. You need a true company to make some of these precursors.
Yeah, it's not as complicated. I mean, the precursors are one part of it. Mixing the actual fentanyl. It's not the most complicated illegal drug that people have experiences is like LSD. You need a kind of chemist to do that. It's more complicated. But fentanyl is some of these things, like even meth. You could find the recipe on the internet, and it's more a kind of mix it up than it is, test tubes and labs.
So I mean, what's the business reason that cartels have decided to kill their customers and drug dealers have decided to risk killing their customers? Why keep doing that? I have my own explanation. It seems so crazy to me that because it's not like you can't find strong drugs between OxyContin and heroin and all these other things. Is it really just that fentanyl creates such a better high when you mix it with whatever it is you're mixing it with, that demand is so strong that the profit margin is just so much better?
The profit margin is extremely high on this. Yes, it's a gold mine in bad ways. But also there's a phenomenon that's going on when you see opioid addiction, that your body tries to adjust to these kinds of substances.
Your tolerance goes
so
up.
As you begin to use, you can take more. And so one, it was a difficulty in diluting the fentanyl because it's its power in a small amount, and they're initially trying to mix powders and stuff. You can't dilute it that way. You have to put it into a liquid, and then you have to take it out of a liquid in order to properly cut it. But the other thing is now you've got people who want different amounts of the substance. They won't get the same high with the kind of dose that a naive user or a first-time user would get. So you have people who are seeking doses of the drug that will kill a naive user. Also, because it's a criminal activity, you have people marketing different concentrations. I mean, the biggest thing that somebody who needs the drug is worried about is being ripped off. I don't get the drug, I get some kind of powder or something else. So sometimes you'll have these overdose incidents, and then users will come to that site to try to find that drug because they think they can handle that drug, or they want that drug, or it's real. Yeah. So it's a kind of, people think, well, they want to commit suicide. Well, they're not thinking about their health, or they wouldn't be addicted. Right. But on the other hand, what they really want is a certain kind of power. And now we have people who are in all stages of addiction, and so we have different concentrations floating around on the streets, and it's still killing people.
That makes sense. I mean, your average drug demand issue is, like you said, you build your tolerance. So it took you one pill to get where you needed to be before, but then you need 5, and then you need 10. And that costs literally 5 times as much, and then 10 times as much. But with fentanyl, it's a very different cost structure. right? So it's very cheap to make it, very cheap to add that extra potency, and therefore, hence the business is what it is.
Now you can put it in, you don't have to worry as much about putting it in a form that someone's going to inject. Most people have some qualms about that.
Yeah.
So you can put it in pill form. It's being mixed with meth. It's being mixed with cocaine, because it has an effect on the experience. Sometimes it's called smoothing it out or making it more mellow, or what used to be called a speedball. And also it's another addictive property in the substance, so that you need the substance. Again, there's two things you're looking for: the euphoria of the drug, and you're trying to prevent withdrawal. So you have a push-pull experience that drives people to take these things.
Yeah, I was just there's a bill floating around Congress today to deal with this zombie drug. How do you say it? Xylosine? Yeah. Is that yeah, it's like a tranquilizer mixed with fentanyl. It's just yet another, offshoot, yet another product out there that we're seeing. And, and this stuff is making it into drugs and people are buying it when they had no intention of buying fentanyl, right? Because it's in such high demand, drug dealers just have it. People want to buy Adderall or something else, but then there's fentanyl in it and they're not used to it. They overdose.
And sometimes there's games being played with the people that are suffering from this, where, I don't have that, but I'll give you this. Mm-hmm. And there's more of a trend today than there was when I started out. I worked on drugs in the Reagan administration. It's more of a trend today of what's called, polydrug use or multiple drug use, where, I use booze, I use marijuana, I use pills, I use other things, but I'm just getting high, so that the pattern of just getting wasted from various substances is of course dangerous, but it's also means that the market has become proliferated with options.
All right, so let's talk about the supply chain. We talk about the Chinese companies that develop the precursors and ship them in. What do we know about how it makes it to the labs in Mexico, and which cartels are in charge of it? Tell us about that dynamic.
Well, I don't see what I used to see when I was in office, but generally speaking, what generally happens here is...
And I can't tell you what I see from the classified version, which is why I'm asking you to just tell us what we know.
Yeah. But what's happened is the cartels have become, again, people think of the cartels as they do one thing. As you know, they don't do one thing. They're a multi-dimensional criminal organization. They're smuggling people. They're doing protection rackets. They're hijacking things. They're kidnapping people. And they sell drugs, and they make a lot of money. And they can do that they control territory. Mm-hmm. And so they operate in those areas they control. They control what are called the plazas. I don't tell people from Texas. Mm-hmm. They control these areas to minimize risk into bringing stuff into the United States, and they use that control to produce the drugs where they want in their territory. Yeah. And then and the major cartels, the Jalisco cartel, the New Generation cartel, all of them have been involved in this because they control the avenues or they control the infrastructure to move criminal activities in their zone. So they either directly control it and do it themselves and vertically integrate, or the people that are doing it are under their direction, or they're paying a tax to them for doing it.
There's two in particular. I mean, Jalisco and Sinaloa, those are the main cartels doing it. As far as I understand it, we don't see it too much from the other ones. They stick to the regular drugs, and that's. I suppose there's some reasons for that, primarily because of what they control and how they control it. I'll add to this again. What I'll add in an unclassified setting is that the supply chain is complicated and hard to target. Right? People think, okay, well, why can't we find out who they are in China? Well, that's just part of it. And
it's hard to operate in China.
You think about how complicated supply chains are in the first place, and how much other stuff, more normal goods, are mixed with any cargo ship. It's very difficult to intercept this stuff, track it, do all of that. And so what are the solutions, right? So we know who's making it, and we could probably figure out where they're making it if we had kind of maybe a closer cooperation and with the Mexican government, which is maybe another subject I want to talk about in your experience working with Mexico. But I've obviously advocated for basically going to war with them in every way. Authorize use of the military force, using all assets of the U.S. government. This is important for the main reason I think it's important. Even if we don't take any actual action, I think it's important to send them a message that says we're sick of it. We're sick of it, and you should probably stop doing it. You've crossed a red line with America. We could watch while you did your marijuana and cocaine trade and all that. We don't like any of it. When I still want to, get rid of all of them. But this is the real red line. This is what's going to cause us to put drones in the air and start targeting you the way we target ISIS. That message would be so powerful, and I think you'd be done with fentanyl within a year, honestly. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think people have to think about this in terms of if you compare it to terror. These people do not want to die for what they're doing. They're trying to get rich and powerful.
They have a very different ideology. That's why they're susceptible to this kind of intimidation.
They're not trying to be martyrs. They're trying to be monsters. And so we have enormous amount of leverage on this if we want to use it. My experience with this was in Colombia during George W. Bush's administration, when we had a cooperative president there who wanted to change the future of his country, and he did. President
Who did you work with? Uribe, yeah.
And look, it was after when I took office. It was after 9/11. We had changed our normal operating procedure in the world for our own security. Yeah. And
something happened.
We did take the gloves off in Colombia, and now it wasn't the same as what was going on in some other parts of the world, but we did help them go after and stop, capture, kill a number of the cartel members that were both paramilitaries and insurgents. And Uribe also was unique in that he extradited almost 1,000 Colombians who we had indicted to the United States, because one of the problems with this on the law enforcement side is the institutions of justice get corrupted, bullied, threatened. They don't have the structures in order to carry out prosecution. So
corrupted and or threatened. Yeah, Uribe is also saving his own judges, because I know Colombia pretty well. I grew up there, and its institutions are much stronger than people realize. It's one of the reasons they were able to be a success story. They're one of the few governments that hasn't been consistently taken over by the military every once in a while, which is a typical Latin American story. I have a deep appreciation for Colombian culture, and it's a cultural issue. They want to be better. I've always loved Colombia for, again, I'm biased, but how different is it from Mexico, though? It has very weak institutions, and they don't like working with us. So, and that's ebbed and flowed. They've worked with us well sometimes. I don't think we're in a good place at the moment. What's your experience working with Mexico as we sort of beat back the Colombian problem, and the power then, of course, shifted to Mexican cartels? I mean, you don't believe me? Just watch Netflix, right? Narcos eventually transitions to Mexico for a reason.
Yeah, initially the Colombians, when they were driven out of the movement of cocaine and marijuana up through the Caribbean, when we started deploying assets to stop that sea and air route, they went up through Central America into Mexico, and they thought, because I was in the George H.W. Bush administration, they thought, well, the Mexicans will just be our subcontractors. They'll do what we want. Well, the Mexicans had a different idea, and they actually had a little war, and the Mexicans won. So they took control, and then that's why we have these networks into the United States. The Mexicans became the distribution a network in the United States for narcotics, and they could run money back into Mexico and into Colombia. So they became operational. Now, the experience I had was with two presidents, Vicente Fox and President Calderon. Fox opened the door a bit. He was not enormously easy to work with, but he opened the door a bit, and we did some things. But Calderon was a massive change from what had happened before in recent time. He accepted assistance. He was trying to change his country for the better. He wanted to cooperate. He extradited some people to the United States, which was not common. And but there was a significant amount of corruption at that time that he was trying to deal with, and to change those institutions when they get corrupted to the degree they were. Is not easy, because people have a history, and you have to both find reliable people. But you have to remember when you, like at one point, Calderon fired the entire customs service, which was great. They were able to rebuild it. However, a bunch of those people went into the cartels and became foot soldiers for the cartels. So there's a so-called alumni problem you have to worry about in these cases. But Calderon was very aggressive and helpful. There's a lot of violence at the beginning because it's always most dangerous when you start to push back against these people. But we were making headway. Now, at that time with Bush, we knew we had to stand with them. I think we talked a little bit about this in the hearing. When these countries are under such attack, it is very important that the United States is a catalyst here. We don't have to do what they need to do, but they need to know we're backing them up. They need to know, we can provide equipment and techniques to protect people that need to be protected. We can provide intelligence. We can provide a safety valve to take people out. We can provide other kinds of support. But they need to know that there's a strong horse on their side to go against these violent individuals. And so we were going down there. I was going down there, the Treasury Secretary, the Homeland Security Secretary, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, Bush's calling. We had somebody down there every month kind of talking about the problems and trying to stand with them, move progress ahead on things like normalizing the legal system so we could exchange evidence that could be used in court. So you saw physical manifestations of our cooperation at the highest levels all the way down.
What are we talking
This
here?
was about, I think he came in about 2003, 2004 to when I left in 2008. Now, I met with him at the end, and just before the election, and I was scheduled to kind of talk to him briefly. We spent over an hour, and he was very concerned that the next administration wasn't going to be committed. And I tried to assure him that Mexico was so important. I said I couldn't speak for them, but I thought they would be committed. Now, the fact of the matter is the next administration wasn't committed. President Obama walked away from that kind of relationship. He didn't want to police the border seriously. He didn't want to enforce the law seriously here. And they announced an end of the drug war. I mean, we have the situation we're in not by accident, not by forces we can't control. We made a conscious policy change, beginning with the Obama administration, to say no more drug war. We're going to do harm reduction. We're going to hand out medicines to reverse overdoses. We're going to
treat the symptoms instead of the source.
We're not going to punish people who are major traffickers. And then we made this kind of phony thing about we were locking up people who were users. Nobody's locked up people who were users in the time I've worked in this area.
It's still a talking point.
Yeah,
right?
it's still...
People in jail for marijuana. Nobody's in jail for marijuana.
Yeah,
this is a myth.
They were walking to choir practice, and they had a baggie of marijuana in their back pocket of their jeans. Nobody goes to jail. I used to say to people that you'll find a unicorn before you find that. Yeah. But, part of this is a kind of, unfortunately, political, cultural argument we're having in the country and had for a long time that's blinding us to now a very deadly situation. Yeah. So everybody wants to have treatment. Everybody wants to have prevention. But there is no effective prevention now beyond you're watching people on your local news dying every day. Every family I know has had somebody, family or friend, die tragically, frequently young people. So, it's not a matter of simply, we're not telling people. Now, frankly, I would like it if our national leader and maybe some of the other people would give a national speech saying, this is a problem, we have to pay attention, we're serious, and we're going to do some things about it. But that hasn't happened. And
it's unbelievable. I mean, you're talking 70, 80,000 deaths a year. I think we still only have 2021 data. That's what we keep citing. But every indication would suggest it's probably gotten worse since 2021. There's no reason to think it's gotten better. And they just have Obama and Democrats still have such a different mindset about it. I mean, I think I'm making progress with some Democrats on this, but it's hard to say. We'll see. I mean, what we're doing now is a cartel task force, which will be, I'm sure we'll invite you back for that in a more official capacity to talk to the task force about how we really target these cartels and stop, with the main goal of stopping the fentanyl issue. I think the long-term goal is to dismantle the cartels in their entirety and create a stable security environment in Mexico. Again, it's thought experiment. I always ask everyone, if you can choose one country in the world to make it 10 times better, which country would you choose? If your answer is anything but Mexico, you don't have a good understanding of foreign policy. That's just, no offense, you just don't. It's right there. It's a clear and present issue for us. I just want the best for Mexico, and that means no cartels, right? And so this ain't that complicated. And fentanyl's unique because it's hard to wrap your arms around the quote unquote the drug problem, the drug war. Cocaine comes from a lot of, there's all of these drugs come from a lot of different places. But when you're talking about two cartels primarily, really Sinaloa, if you really just want to narrow it down, that primarily produce this, and like a few dozen Chinese companies that are, this is a solvable problem. This is a targetable problem. So I think like an operator where I target a terrorist network, this is a very solvable problem if we just have the will to do it. And, we don't have a Calderon in office either in Mexico. We have AMLO who starts threatening to campaign against me if I even talk about military force against the cartels. And so we got work to do to make this happen.
Well, that's a badge of honor.
I suppose. Yeah.
So yeah. I think, I think we have a failure of politically to understand that we have an obligation to the people who are suffering and dying, as you know. I don't need to tell you, but the political division here is ridiculous. And I think the part of the problem is that we blame the victims. I mean, we think, well, people decide to take these drugs.
That is victim blaming when you say it's a demand problem, and yeah. I can't stand it.
Yeah, and it is true that people take the drugs, but we have a permissive culture. People who are, and we also tell people it's okay to do this. Look, I'm a baby boomer. From my generation onward, part of growing up was thought, well, you could experiment with drugs. You can be creative, artistic, daredevil.
Right.
Look, people shouldn't speed, but people do because they don't usually suffer the consequences from it. And, it's exhilarating in some way. Okay, that doesn't mean it's right, but it means that this is another form of kind of risk-taking and cultural experience that we have here. The problem is when you flood the environment with these dangerous substances, that risk-taking gets out of control.
It's out of control, and it annoys me because there's a lot of people who want to legalize marijuana, do this and that. I'm like, and they're like, well, I smoke all the time. I'm very productive, and I'm like, that's fine for you. You're kind of screwing other people who don't have that switch in their brain that allows them to be. What would you call it? Some people have the ability to delay gratification. I'm only going to do this much right now, I'm going to, they limit themselves because they have that discipline. Not everybody has that.
Well, also the lie in there is with all these substances, if you are a biological being the way we are, if you take them and you take them in enough frequency for long enough, you will become addicted. Now, again, it doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't happen all the time. It varies with your genetic makeup and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, don't fool yourself. When you're doing this, you are taking a risk. Mm-hmm. And that risk can happen to anybody. Some people, it's a greater risk and it's a more frequent they run into a problem, or they run into addiction, or they run into death. But the fact of the matter is, people fool themselves and say, well, if you have strong character, you can do this. So it's only the people with weak character that have a problem. Some of the Europeans still think this way in the Netherlands and other places.
But your point is important. Like people, this comes from our left wing, and of course AMLO said. I understand why AMLO, the president of Mexico, says it, because he's just trying to divert blame. He's like, it's not our fault, it's your fault. You guys just want all the drugs. It's like, now I know for a fact that quietly he's beginning to understand that Mexicans also have a serious problem with fentanyl overdoses. They just don't track it the way we do, but it's bad in Mexico too. We're not the only ones who do drugs, as it turns out. It's everybody. But on the left, what the kind of left wing and maybe libertarian, response is it's a demand problem. And I'm like, well, okay, so you're simultaneously victim blaming, but you're also part of this libertine culture that says like, do whatever you want, legalize drugs. Like you can't have it both ways, to be honest. And I always point out too, and you see this with the opioid crisis, is that the supply creates demand. It absolutely creates demand. And you see it, I use my wife grew up in Maryland, and I use her high school as an example, because it's such a problem in the Northeast, especially. And it was one drug dealer that got into the groups of friends at a particular high school and got everybody addicted, and didn't kill anybody then, but they were addicted for life, because when you get it young, you're addicted for life. And they might come back to it 10, 15 years later, take way too much, maybe what they were used to taking back in the day, and then they're dead. That's crazy. It's like a demon being possessed by a demon for years and years and years, and it finally gets you. And that was created because of one drug dealer. And so of course supply creates demand, and it gets to a broader question. I mean, what do you when people say, "Oh, the war on drugs has failed," how do you respond to that?
Well, we've had remarkable declines when we've taken the right policy. My argument is, I understand there's a political dimension to that statement, but if you want to be empirical about it, there are few domestic problems that have been more susceptible to proper policy pressure than drugs. We had a peak of you want to talk overall drug use in the late 70s, went down dramatically during Reagan, even when cocaine was coming in and there was an uptick in cocaine. Then we passed laws. We went after both the suppliers and the sources of it. There was an effort for them to recover. We went back after them during George W. Bush with President Uribe. Cocaine use dropped 60% in the United States by the time we ended and going into the beginning of the Obama administration because of the eradication of coca and the taking apart of the cartels. Now, Obama also reversed that progress in Colombia by forcing a kind of reconciliation between the cartels on the insurgent side and others in Colombia. But the same thing was happening in Mexico. We were going after and reducing the Mexican supply of, we cut off the original fentanyl threat that I talked about earlier. We were going after the heroin at that time, but they don't have to use much heroin. They don't have to create much heroin now because fentanyl is the substitute for this. And you're absolutely right that what happens here is, and what we don't seem to be conscious of is, we're creating a multi-generational problem because this kind of addiction doesn't go away. Especially opioids. We've had long-term studies from, frankly, from soldiers coming back from Vietnam and California. There was a long-term study. And people can be clean and sober for 5 years, and that's a different, less powerful opioid, and relapse. Also, you have medical treatment where you're going to have painkillers being used now. There's a danger of relapse. And you're absolutely right. I mean, people don't use their own experience. I mean, most people have more experience with things like smoking. If you were a smoker and you stopped, if you start smoking again after 5 years, you will not start as a new smoker. You'll go back to your previous pattern. This rewires the brain, and you go and what it creates is a kind of craving. It creates a reaction. But what's the trigger? The trigger is the substance being available to create the return to that behavior. So we have to think of this more as a mass poisoning, and we ought to blame the poisoners and not blame the victims. And you're right. This is not an undoable problem for us. This is a small number of people, relatively speaking. People say, well, it's whack-a-mole. They can substitute. My goal, and it sounds like yours, is tell me how many moles there are.
Yeah. You can start whacking at a certain point. Yeah. And it's a mitigation. That's like the war on drugs is never, we just lost it. It's like, what does that even mean? It's a mitigation strategy. That's always what it's been, and it's too simplistic to say you can win or lose it. I mean, obviously, so you're never going to change human nature. Human nature always wants a vice. Right. Like everybody's there. I get it. It is what it is.
These substances override the normal control functions of human beings. But to say that we've lost is like saying, well, let's get rid of schools because every year new children are born and they're ignorant. So we've lost the war on education. Yeah, we still have people failing math. Or we've lost the war on cancer. I mean, it's like civilized societies do certain things to maintain decency. And if you don't do those things, you're not a civilized society anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I just think, I hate it when people oversimplify the issue like that. I kind of I have a quote from you I read. When you say, you wrote an article called Legalizing Drugs is Dumber Than You May Think. You're not only dumb, but irresponsible talk of legalization weakens public resolve against use and addiction. It attacks the moral clarity that supports responsible behavior and the strength of key institutions. So talk of legalization today is a real cost to our families and families in other places. The best remedy would be some thoughtful reflection on the drug problem, what we say about it. So I thought that was an interesting response to the just legalize it argument, right? And how has that turned out for us in states that have legalized drugs?
Well, it's worse. I mean, you see this in all the states that have legalized marijuana have higher rates of other drug use and higher rates of marijuana problems. You see this. You see this now because for 100 years or more, we've known that marijuana in particular, which is the most commonly discussed drug in this regard, has an effect on mental illness, including psychosis. So that's been known for a long time. It's been denied by people, or people want to ignore it, or they want to say it's not true, but it's a fact. I mean, facts are stubborn things, as Ronald Reagan said, and others. So what are we getting now in our cities? What most places, even smaller towns, you now have people who are dysfunctional laying on the streets. You have people acting out in psychotic rages. They're usually polydrug users. A lot of them are using marijuana. A lot of them are using other things. These are people whose lives have been completely destroyed, who are laying there now, spending their lives on self-destruction. And there are more of them than any of our systems can handle. Our treatment system, our mental health system, our public welfare system, and they've shattered families. And they're making areas that are not livable. They're not places where people can start a business, and that's getting worse, not better. I mean, go to any place. I mean, you walk down the streets in New York City. We have some work we do with people in New York. Every time I go to New York now, you walk down the street, it's marijuana smoke everywhere. Yeah. I mean, and so when your workforce, when the people in a community in large percentages are high a lot of the time. What do you think that's doing to them? Why do our enemies want that to happen here? Because they can destroy us that way. Right. And so we're kind of pretending we don't see that, but it's kind of hiding in plain sight.
Is there going back to the states that have legalized marijuana? So the stats are, just to be clear on this, higher drug use, young and old. I mean, because look, a lot of their arguments are, maybe adults will get it, but maybe it'll reduce drug use amongst teenagers, which is what we're worried about for the reasons you explained. I think the studies show, a cognitive impairment if you smoke a lot of marijuana before 26 or something like that. But it's not what we see. And intuitively, I wouldn't imagine you'd see it because I'm like, wait, you're just making it easier. Yes, I get it. It was already easy. Well, it wasn't that easy. I don't actually know how to get drugs illegally. You got to kind of be in a circle of sorts to it's not that easy. But it's definitely easy if it's the same as buying beer, and you just kind of like ask an adult to go in if it's an adult, over 21's an adult these days. But of course it's easier. So are we seeing higher usages or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in contact with a woman who's a emergency room physician in Pueblo, Colorado, which has been a kind of firestorm center of this in Colorado, which was the first to legalize. And she writes me regularly with what they see in the emergency room. Yeah. They've had children from Head Start programs brought in who are having a psychotic breakdown because they've been given, there's candy gummies and other kinds of forms of this, and they Head Start programs,
so they're very young.
I mean, 4 or 5 years old. And have to be restrained by the police because they're physically going to harm themselves and they're striking out. So that's what we're seeing, and that's not even just 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds. That's kindergartners and pre-4. Yeah. So we don't want to pay attention to that. In addition to the adults whose lives also are valuable, of course, who are out of control. So the argument now that you can kind of legalize this, well, of course, the industry has created higher and higher potencies. When Cheech and Chong were making movies, it was 3% THC, the psychoactive ingredient. Now you can get 15, 20, 25, even higher.
Nuts. And people are like, it's just like alcohol. I'm like, it's really not. No. Because it's just not. Like you got to drink a certain amount. You get drunker as you drink. It's not that way with an edible. It just hits you all of a sudden. You think it didn't. You think it wasn't going to hit you, so you drive. Cops. I'm not aware of a test to test for somebody who's super high and driving. I mean, it's just. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be an honest conversation.
When I was in the drug office, we were trying to get a testing a protocol similar to a breathalyzer. The difference is that marijuana is oil soluble, where alcohol is water based, as are the other drugs of abuse. So it was hard to do this. You can do it with trained officers who have gone through training and can see by your behavior, get out of the car, walk the line. Sure. They can bring you in. But short of a blood test, you can't easily do it. Yeah. Also, because it's oil soluble, it stays in your body, so it can actually build up over time, and it can have longer duration. So yeah, we don't test the emergency rooms usually don't test and release the results of people who've been in accidents for a drug screen because they're afraid about insurance and so forth.
And is there even a law? Like,
you can't drive impaired, but there hasn't been a
there's
not
not a test the way there is with alcohol. It's
right.
I think it's like 0.08 or something, but it's not that. There's no scientific way to do that with drugs or marijuana in particular.
Well, also the difference, as you pointed out, with unlike alcohol, where yes, you can have social consumption of that substance, but for all the drugs of abuse, essentially, when you take it, you get high. That's the point of taking it, is to get high. Nobody wants to get a slight social buzz, although people will make arguments here because there's a lot of...
Some do, sure, but like...
But basically, the form of consumption is, I want to get high. So, and that's the worst form of behavior if you want to become dependent, because that's the form of behavior that's most likely to produce both a craving for the euphoria, and it does produce withdrawal. It's not true that even marijuana doesn't produce withdrawal symptoms.
So the other argument is that it'll get rid of the black market. You won't have like drug wars anymore because it's legalized. Does that come true?
No. Well, there's regularly articles that you see with the California legal dispensaries complaining that they got to enforce the law more because the illegal market's coming in large numbers. What it does is it reduces the risk to criminals. So what they do is they come into those areas where it's legalized. You can't control it.
And they just undercut the price of the legal ones.
Absolutely. And even grow or produce marijuana there. I mean, when you have these legal markets,
right?
What
a lot of the cartel operations have actually. It's not a different
color,
right?
It's not a different plant. It's the same thing.
So the cartel operations, the production operations, have actually moved into California.
Yeah, when I was there, they were using federal lands to cultivate, but now they can just do it anywhere. You can. But who's the other thing is, once you have this priority of we're not going to pay attention to the problem of drug abuse, who's going to be the enforcer here? Yeah. Whose job is it? Some people are still out there trying to protect the public, but basically what's happened, you have states where when it's legal, if they stop you in your car with a large quantity of marijuana for a violation of one kind or another, the state law is you have to give the marijuana back to the driver when you release them. Now, when you know what the harm is as a law enforcement professional, when you're watching families and individuals have their lives wrecked, it just undermines the sense of professional responsibility of the people who are the best and on the front line for us. Would
it be, because we talked about, because I think it's so self-evident about how you might target and sort of the way you would target a terrorist network. The cartels in Mexico, of course, you need the cooperation of the Mexican government. What changes do we need to make to our own laws here to target cartels or fentanyl dealers? Is it just higher sentencing? Is it classifying fentanyl as a poison, which would result in a higher sentencing if they were dealing it? Is it that simple?
It's not true, because I was there when Senator Biden was a fan of mandatory minimums and going in and breaking down the organization. It's not true that the higher penalties don't help. One, they help you find individuals and help them to cooperate to destroy the network. So you end up with an intelligence.
You're more likely to rat out the rest of your network if you're facing 20 years versus 10 years. This is not rocket science.
There's no question.
Basic human nature. Yeah.
And secondly, what you need to do is spend time on developing the information, the intelligence, law enforcement, and foreign intelligence that helps you do a laydown. Look, we have been hit.
You've gotten more buzzers during your podcast than any other podcast guest in the history of podcasts on my show. It's been nonstop. Nobody.
Well, I'm somebody. I worked when I was in graduate school. Going back to the 70s for the House Republican Conference. So I was actually in an office where these would go off all the time for a while.
Did you know what they meant back then?
No, but we had somebody in the office that did. So you just say, okay, tell me when that does something at me.
We've lost all those people. I think that one means we have votes now, but there were like the four others that just went. I have no idea why. Why are they going off?
This is like, I don't know, they still deliver buckets of ice to the office. They used to deliver buckets of ice, and there used to be offices that had actual working fireplace they used to deliver wood to long after anybody used
that.
That
would be nice. I mean, they spent so much money refurbishing. Like, this is a new wing in Canon. I had to move out of my old office to come to the new one, and I'm like, it's a little nicer. And it's not that different. I don't know why this took 2 years to remodel. Like, it's not, I mean, they made the bathroom a little bit better. That's it. I would have liked a wood fireplace. There are wood fireplaces around the Capitol, especially right outside the house, the house floor. That's really nice. But man, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I suspect I would get into politics today too.
I think some of the leadership, like the bigger rooms, none of the individual offices have fireplaces, but maybe some of like the committee rooms and leadership rooms do. So, but no, we don't get ice anymore unless my staff, maybe we choose not to get ice, but we need that ice. That's, yeah, because sometimes on this podcast we like to have some whiskey. So we're wrapping up because we gotta go vote. Oddly enough, this week we are voting to make fentanyl Schedule 1. Which is weird. I know the administration supports it. I've heard them say it, I think. Democrats were against it for this mandatory minimum reason. And you're like, what will you guys do? They're very frustrating. This whole debt ceiling negotiation we're dealing with this week is very frustrating because behind closed doors, they're oftentimes like, oh, yeah, absolutely. But, but they just talk around it, whether it's a border issue or cartels and fentanyl. And I'm desperate to make the cartel issue bipartisan because it has to be. We are in divided governments. Well,
this is the way it was. I worked with with Congressman Rangel, with Senator Biden, with Senator Leahy, John Conyers, when we passed crack mandatory minimums, and that was because people wanted to protect black men and women, young people.
Congressional Black Caucus was
from the poison of crack, which was
Congressional Black
people.
Caucus was a huge supporter of that.
And okay.
And now it's changed, and they act
quickly. It wasn't as over quickly as it should have been. I'm not saying we couldn't have done some better job in that regard, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't punish killers, you kill innocent citizens, and that equation's not going to change.
It's very frustrating because reporters don't ask Democrats these tough questions. Well, you supported it then, like why not? Like just explain the philosophical evolution. Explain it. They never will. You owe it to people to explain, why was Bernie Sanders for border security like 5 minutes ago, and it wasn't that long ago, and now not. Just explain your philosophical evolution. I'd love to hear it. Just to help us understand, and then we can know how to deal with you, but they just don't. They just don't. So it's a longer conversation on the politics of all these issues.
Thank you for what you're doing. I've been around, as I said, Washington for a long time. There are people who stand up and fight for these things. There are people who don't because they're triangulating something else. But you're a great source of encouragement for me in what you're trying to do here and the clarity on this and other issues because our country needs that now because we have a lot of enemies and we're taking too many casualties.
I agree. Well, thank you for all the work you've done. You've been in service a lot longer than I have, John. So thanks for being on, and we'll talk more as we get this task force revved up.
Anytime. Thank you, Sen.